There were 400 people in that lobby. 400 people who watched a woman get shoved backward by the man she trusted to protect her. 400 people who stood frozen briefcases in hand, coffee cups raised halfway to mouths, fingers hovering over phones, and did absolutely nothing. Except one. He wasn't security. He wasn't management. He was a 37-year-old widower in a faded gray work shirt who had a second-grade parent-teacher conference at 4 o'clock and a broken panel to fix before lunch. But Declan Shaw had spent years learning the difference between a situation that looks dangerous and one that actually is. This was the second kind, and he was the only person in that building who knew it. Before we go any further, if you're watching this for the first time, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because stories like this one come out every week, and I promise you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's get into it. The rain started just before noon. Came down hard against the glass face of the North Star Aeronautics headquarters, 42 floors of steel and reflective panels rising out of the financial district, like something designed specifically to make ordinary people feel small. Which, Declan had decided after 3 visits to the building, was probably the point. He pulled his truck into the service bay at 11:47 a.m. and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the rain hammer the roof. His coffee was cold. It had been cold since 8, when he'd been halfway through drinking it, and Ruby had knocked the entire mug sideways reaching for her backpack, and he'd spent the next 15 minutes wiping the counter, while she apologized, in that way 8-year-olds do loudly, dramatically, and with total sincerity. He told her it was fine. It was fine. It was just coffee. He grabbed his toolbox from the back seat and jogged through the rain toward the service entrance. The work order was straightforward. Emergency control panel malfunction on the building's secondary HVAC circuit, basement level 2. Standard diagnostic, probably a relay issue, maybe 2 hours if the wiring had been installed by someone who actually knew what they were doing. He'd been to North Star twice before, once for a generator calibration, once for a pressure sensor on the 15th floor. Both times, the facilities manager had been apologetic about the mess and generous with bad vending machine coffee. Today, the facilities manager wasn't answering his phone. Declan checked in with the front security desk instead. The guard on duty, a young woman with a North Star ID badge, and the expression of someone who hadn't slept well in several days, scanned his credentials, handed him a contractor lanyard, and pointed him toward the service elevator, without quite meeting his eyes. He noticed that, filed it away. The lobby was busy in the way large corporate lobbies are always busy, controlled movement, low conversation, the soft percussion of dress shoes on marble. Declan crossed toward the service corridor, nodding at the facility's contact listed on his work order, who he spotted near the main elevator bank, and was halfway to the basement access when he heard the first raised voice. It came from the direction of the executive elevators. He didn't stop walking immediately. Raised voices in office buildings weren't unusual. Someone missing a deadline, someone losing an argument over a parking spot. But something about the pitch of it made him slow his steps. Then he heard a second voice, sharper, more controlled. Female. Didn't authorize that, Derek, and you know that. You don't get to decide who has access to my... Vivienne, the male voice cut across hers with the kind of practiced authority that's meant to humiliate. You need to lower your voice. Declan stopped walking, turned slowly and looked across the lobby. She was easy to identify even from 40 feet away. 30 years old, give or take, in a charcoal blazer and dark slacks, dark hair pulled back from a face that was currently doing everything it could to stay composed. The badge on her lanyard read CEO Vivienne Rowe in the same font as the building's exterior signage. She'd stepped out of the executive elevator and walked directly into what appeared to be an argument she hadn't expected to be having in public. The man across from her was Derek Morrow. Declan knew the name from the building's security directory. He'd reviewed it before his first visit, the way he reviewed the directory of every building he worked in. Security director. Mid-40s, broad shoulders, the particular posture of a man who had spent years being the most imposing person in any given room. Derek was not happy. I'm telling you this for your own good, Derek said loud enough, now that conversations in the nearest quarter of the lobby had quietly stopped. The board is concerned. What you've been doing with those files. What I've been doing, my job, Vivienne said. Her voice was still level, but the effort it cost her was visible. And what you're doing right now is overstepping in a way that you absolutely cannot walk back from. So I'm going to give you one opportunity to... Derek grabbed her arm. Not a guiding hand. Not a steadying gesture. He grabbed her by the upper arm, the way you grab someone. When you've already decided the conversation is over and you're going to be the one to end it. And he pushed her one firm shove backward toward the elevator doors. You're too emotional, he said. You need to be removed from this situation before you do something that can't be. Let go of me. 3 security guards materialized from positions around the lobby. Declan clocked them in the same moment, one from behind a pillar near the main entrance, one stepping out from behind the reception desk, one descending from the mezzanine level above. All 3 moving with the coordinated timing of people who had been waiting for a signal. That wasn't lobby security responding to an incident. That was a planned deployment. The lobby had gone very quiet. Not the startled quiet of a place reacting to something unexpected, the held breath. Quiet of 400 people who had seen something they recognized as dangerous and were calculating, with the animal precision of self-preservation, whether getting involved was worth what it might cost them. Nobody moved. Declan set his toolbox down on the marble floor. Set it down carefully, without hurry, the way you set something down when you've decided to leave it there for a while. Then he walked across the lobby toward the executive elevators. He wasn't moving fast. He wasn't running, wasn't broadcasting anything that would read as aggression to the guards, or give Derek an excuse to escalate before Declan had a chance to actually look at what was in front of him. Because in the 10 seconds it had taken him to cross half the lobby, he had already noticed 3 things that nobody else in that building seemed to have seen. The first was the badges. All 3 security guards were wearing North Star credentials, the right color, the right format, the North Star logo in the upper left corner. But the badge holders were the previous model, with the rounded corners and the magnetic rather than chip-based strip. North Star had updated their access credentials 8 months ago. Declan had been issued a new contractor badge on his second visit. Any current North Star security employee would have the updated version. These men didn't work here, or if they did, they'd been given reason to keep using outdated credentials. The second thing was the radios. One of the guards, the one who had come from behind the reception desk, had his radio clipped to his left shoulder, and the channel indicator was visible from 6 feet away. Channel 4. Declan happened to know, because he'd requested the building's emergency communication protocols as part of his contractor onboarding, that North Star Security operated on channels 1 through 3. Channel 4 was reserved for external emergency services and was not used internally. These men were communicating on a frequency North Star Security wasn't monitoring. The third thing was the exits. The main lobby exits, 3 sets of glass doors opening onto the street, had all, in the past 90 seconds, shifted from their standard propped-open position to closed. The small green indicator lights above each door that showed their electronic lock status had changed from green to red. Someone from somewhere in this building had just locked the lobby exits. Declan positioned himself between Vivienne and the 3 guards. Derek looked at him with the particular contempt that large men sometimes have for men who don't look like a physical threat, the amused, slightly irritated contempt of someone who is confident this will be resolved in the next 30 seconds and is mostly annoyed at the inconvenience. "Sir," Derek said with exaggerated patience, "this is an internal corporate matter. I'm going to need you to step aside and continue." "You're on Channel 4, Declan said. Derek stopped. "Your security operates on channels 1 through 3, Declan continued. His voice was even, conversational almost. "Channel 4 is emergency services only. So whoever you've got coordinating from outside this building right now isn't North Star Security." He watched Derek's eyes, watched the flicker of something there, not fear, not yet, but recalculation. The rapid internal recalculation of a man who has just realized that the piece on the board he dismissed is more complicated than he thought.
"I don't know what you think you're..."
2 more of your men are going to come through that service corridor in about 15 seconds, Declan said. He tilted his head slightly toward the corridor entrance on the east side of the lobby. Because that's the secondary staging point if the lobby approach gets complicated. And it just got complicated. He said it calmly. The way you state a fact. The lobby went even quieter than it had been before. Everyone watched the service corridor entrance. 12 seconds later, the door opened. Two men in North Star security uniforms stepped through it, stopped immediately when they saw the configuration in front of them, the crowd of watching employees, and Declan standing between their colleagues and the CEO. The silence that followed was a particular kind of silence. Kind that happens when a room full of people simultaneously revises its understanding of what it's watching. Vivienne Rowe turned and looked at Declan with an expression that was one part astonishment and one part something harder to name, the look of someone who has been in a dangerous situation long enough to be past shock and is now in the rapid, urgent process of deciding whether the new variable in front of her is safe. "Who are you?" she asked. "Building systems technician," Declan said. "I'm here to fix a control panel in the basement." She glanced at his contractor lanyard. "That's not an answer. It's the accurate one." Derek recovered himself. His face had done something complicated in the past 30 seconds: embarrassment, anger, and a sharpening of focus that Declan read as a man switching from a plan to a contingency. "Remove him," Derek said. The guard from the mezzanine moved first. What happened in the following 4 seconds was not a fight, exactly. It was closer to the kind of spatial rearrangement that happens when someone who genuinely knows what they're doing encounters someone who doesn't. Brief, decisive, and almost completely silent. The guard found his forward movement redirected rather than blocked, and ended up 2 steps to the left of where he'd intended to be, off balance and suddenly standing in a position that put him between 2 of his colleagues rather than between them and the problem. The second guard stopped. The third one didn't move at all. Declan hadn't hit anyone. He hadn't raised his voice. He was still standing in the same spot, between Vivienne and the closest guard, and his expression had not changed. "Step back," he said. He wasn't talking to Derek this time. He was talking to the guards. "All 3 of you." Something in the way he said it, not a request, not a threat, just a statement of what was about to happen, made the guards take a collective half-step backward. Even Derek moved. Just slightly. Just enough. Vivienne exhaled. "Exits are locked," Declan said to her, quietly enough that it didn't carry across the lobby. "Have been for about 2 minutes. Someone with access to your building management system did it remotely." She stopped, pressed her fingers briefly to her temple. That's not something Derek could do. He doesn't have that level of access. "No," Declan agreed. "He doesn't." She understood what he was implying. He could see the moment she understood it, the slight change in her expression, the way her eyes moved to Derek and then beyond him, as if she were looking through the lobby walls toward something elsewhere in the building. "The board meeting," she said. "When is it?" 2 hours. "I was supposed to present financial documentation to the board." "Evidence of." She stopped, looked at him again with that evaluating look. "Who are you?" "I told you. You predicted where those men would come from. You identified their radio frequency." She glanced at the guards who were still standing in an uncomfortable cluster, none of them quite sure what their next move was. "Building systems technicians don't do that. Some of them do," Declan said. Across the lobby, he could see people beginning to reach for their phones. In another couple of minutes, this would be documented photos, videos, the chaotic data trail of a large crowd processing a situation through their screens. That was a problem, but not the most immediate one. The most immediate one was that someone, somewhere upstairs in this building, had just watched their lobby operation fail and was now making new decisions. Declan could feel the shift in it, the slight change in the building's electronic atmosphere, the way the lights had dimmed fractionally the past 30 seconds in patterns that had nothing to do with the environmental controls. Someone was running systems diagnostics, looking for alternative approaches. "Ms. Rowe," he said, "you need to not be in this lobby in the next 3 minutes. Those are my employees." She looked at the watching crowd, hundreds of people, many of whom had been staring long enough to start looking uncertain about what they were witnessing. "They need you to be somewhere you can still function," Declan said. "Which won't be here if whoever's running this from upstairs gets the lobby cameras on their network." She held his gaze for a moment, doing what she clearly did instinctively, which was evaluate. "You have a plan?" she asked. "I have a direction," he said. "Plans require more information than I currently have." Something shifted in her expression. A small thing, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. The brief, dark amusement of a person who has been lied to smoothly enough, often enough, that the unfamiliar texture of honesty registers as interesting. "All right," she said. Derek stepped forward. "Vivienne, you cannot leave with Derek." Her voice, when she turned it on him, had a quality Declan hadn't heard in it before. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. The tone of someone who has been interrupted for the last time. "Whatever you think is happening here, I want you to understand that I've already seen enough to know that you are finished. And the only question right now is what kind of finished you choose." Derek's jaw tightened. He looked from Vivienne to Declan and back again, and the calculation behind his eyes was visible now, a man measuring distances and odds and coming up with numbers he didn't like. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," Vivienne said. "But it's mine to make." Declan retrieved his toolbox from where he'd set it on the floor. He'd need the equipment, not all of it, but specific pieces that were going to matter once he got access to the building's maintenance network. Started toward the service corridor on the north side of the lobby, the one that led to the secondary stairwells and the maintenance infrastructure corridors that ran between the building's internal walls like a secondary nervous system. Vivienne fell into step beside him. Behind them, Derek Morrow stood in the center of the lobby and watched them go, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man who had lost. It was the expression of a man who was already planning what he did next. That, Declan thought, was the more dangerous kind. He adjusted his grip on the toolbox and walked faster. On the third floor above them, in an office with a view of the rain-streaked financial district, Malcolm Sayer Northstar's chief operating officer, a man who had spent 11 years building a reputation as the steadiest hand in the company, picked up his phone and dialed. The man who answered on the second ring was not a Northstar employee. "The lobby didn't hold," Malcolm said. A pause on the other end. "Who interfered?" "We don't know yet. Building technician, maybe. Or something else." Another pause. Longer this time. "Find out," the voice said. "And Malcolm, whatever he is, he's not in your system. That means he's not in your plan. Handle it before the board meeting or the plan dies with it." Malcolm ended the call. He walked to his window and looked down at the lobby below, at the scattered configuration of guards, the watching employees, the absence of the two people who were supposed to still be there. He picked up the building's internal communications handset, and he began to make the kind of move that couldn't be taken back. The service corridor smelled like concrete dust and recycled air, the particular combination that exists in the working guts of every large building, the part that no architect ever photographs and no facilities brochure ever mentions. Fluorescent strips ran along the ceiling at uneven intervals, and the floor was bare poured concrete with painted yellow lines, marking equipment boundaries that hadn't been relevant since the last renovation. Declan moved through it without hesitation, which Vivienne noticed. She noticed a lot of things in those first few minutes after they left the lobby, the way he checked each cross corridor before stepping into it, the way he kept his toolbox in his left hand and his right hand free, the way his eyes moved in a pattern that wasn't random and wasn't casual. It was the movement of someone who had spent a long time in environments where missing something could end your day in a way that couldn't be undone. She had hired enough security consultants in the past 2 years to recognize the difference between a person trained in corporate protection and a person trained in something that corporate protection was only a pale imitation of. She just didn't say anything about it yet. She was still working out what kind of situation she was in. "The maintenance network access point," she said, keeping her voice low, even though the corridor was empty. "You said you needed it. B-level. Secondary infrastructure hub." He glanced at her. "You know this building's systems?" "I know the building. I've been here 6 years," she paused, "4 as CEO. "So you know where the physical network terminals are?" "I know where they're supposed to be. Facilities doesn't exactly send me updated maps." "Close enough." He shifted his toolbox to his right hand and took the next left, which was, she realized, correct. He was navigating a building he'd visited twice, using what had to be a memorized layout from documentation most contractors never bothered to read. Filed that away, too. The B-level hub was a room the size of a large closet, accessed through a door marked AgeWAC Secondary Authorized Personnel in the kind of stenciled lettering that had been applied sometime in the 90s and never updated. Inside were 2 equipment racks, a wall-mounted terminal, and a tangle of conduit that fed into the building's bones in 6 different directions. Declan set his toolbox on the floor, opened it, and began removing tools with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they needed before they opened the lid. Not frantic, not slow, just precise. "You're going to tell me what's happening," Vivienne said. It wasn't a question. Working on understanding it myself. He connected a diagnostic tablet to the terminal's secondary port, a port that was not, she noted, the standard maintenance connection point. He'd found it immediately. "What do you know about Malcolm Sayer's access history over the past 6 weeks?" She was quiet for a moment. Why 6 weeks? Because whatever's happening today didn't start this morning. This level of coordination takes time. Physical staging, radio infrastructure, building system access. Someone's been inside your network for a while. He looked up from the tablet. "Weeks is my estimate. Could be 8. Vivienne crossed her arms. It was a gesture she recognized in herself as a habit she'd developed when she was working through something she didn't want to say out loud yet. "Malcolm requested extended administrative access to the building management system 7 weeks ago," she said. "He told me it was for efficiency. Consolidating vendor oversight." She paused. "I approved it." Declan didn't say anything judgmental. He just turned back to the terminal. "That's going to bother me for a long time," she said, mostly to herself. "It should bother you," he said, "but later. Right now it's useful information." He began running a scan that populated the tablet screen with a cascade of access logs. "Your building management system is compromised. Has been for at least," he paused, reading 53 days. "Someone installed a secondary control layer over your security network. Legitimate commands still work, but they can be overridden remotely. Exits, cameras, elevators, internal communications, someone outside this building can override any of them. Malcolm authorized the access. Whether he's running it himself is a different question." He scrolled through the logs. "Technical sophistication of what's been installed here is not a one-person job. And it's not commercial software. This is custom architecture." Vivienne was quiet for a moment. "How do you know what custom security architecture looks like?" "I've seen it before." "Where?" He didn't answer that. He kept reading the logs, and the line of his jaw was doing something, a slight tightening that she wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't been watching him carefully. Something he'd found in those logs had landed differently than the rest of it. "What is it?" she asked. "The signature structure of this override system." He paused. "I've seen something like it before. Not identical. The approach, the way it layers over the existing network, instead of replacing it, the way it uses the building's own protocols to mask the intrusion, it's based on a methodology from a surveillance program that was developed for military use." Stared at him. "Malcolm worked for a defense contractor before North Star. 8 years ago." "I know. How do you know that?" He looked up from the tablet. "I read the building directory." "The building directory doesn't have employment histories." Another pause. "Different from the first one." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She didn't push it. She was beginning to understand that there was a shape to what he wasn't saying, and that pushing at it directly wasn't going to work. She'd figure it out eventually. She was good at figuring things out. Eventually, it was how she'd ended up with the evidence that had prompted today's board presentation in the first place. "The financial documentation I was bringing to the board," she said. "It's on a secured server accessible from my office. If Malcolm has control of the building's network, can't access secured executive servers through the building management system. Different infrastructure." He paused. "But he can lock you out of the physical space." "Which he's done. My office. Elevators to executive floors have been restricted. Your credentials have been flagged as compromised. Someone entered an incorrect access code attached to your badge number 4 times in the past hour. 3 incorrect attempts triggers an automatic security review that temporarily suspends executive access. 4 is a manual lock." Her expression went through several things in rapid sequence, landing on a cold, contained fury that was more frightening than shouting would have been. "He used my own security protocols against me. It's efficient," Declan said. He didn't mean it as a compliment, and she didn't take it as one. He was just describing what had happened with the flat accuracy of someone who has spent time studying the way people dismantle other people's defenses. He creates a record of a security breach on your credentials, locks your physical access, and then The radio on his belt, his contractor-issued building radio, crackled. Both of them went still. What came through the radio was Malcolm Sayer's voice. Calm, measured. The voice of a man making a company-wide announcement from what sounded like an executive conference room, with the slight acoustic resonance of a good speaker system behind him. Attention all North Star personnel. This is COO Malcolm Sayer. I want to address a situation that has developed in the past 30 minutes and may be causing concern among staff. CEO Vivienne Rowe has been experiencing significant emotional distress related to ongoing personal matters and has, unfortunately, allowed that distress to affect her judgment in a professional setting today. She is currently with an unidentified individual who entered our building under false contractor credentials and has physically interfered with our security personnel. Out of concern for Ms. Rowe's safety and well-being, I am temporarily assuming executive operational authority per Section 14 of our corporate continuity protocols. Building security has been placed on elevated alert. If any staff member has information about the location of Ms. Rowe or the unidentified individual, please contact security immediately. This situation is being handled. Thank you for your patience. The radio went quiet. Vivienne's hand, which had come up to cover her mouth halfway through Malcolm's announcement, lowered slowly. She looked at Declan, and what was in her eyes now wasn't fear. It was something harder than fear and more complicated. "He just told 400 employees that I've had a breakdown," she said. "He told 400 employees a story," Declan said. "There's a difference. Not to the people who believe it. Some of them won't. Some isn't enough." She pressed her fingers to her temple again. Not in distress, in the focused way of someone thinking hard. Section 14 of corporate continuity is a real protocol. It exists for genuine emergency succession situations. He's going to use it to run the board meeting without me. The financial documentation I had, he's going to either bury it or reframe it. If he presents to the board first, then your evidence becomes a disgruntled former CEO's accusation, Declan said. "I know." She looked at him sharply. "You know a lot of things you shouldn't know for someone who came here to fix a HVAC panel." "Control panel," he said. The work order said control panel. "Is that really the detail you want to focus on right now?" Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but the acknowledgement of one, somewhere behind his expression. It lasted about a second. "No," he said, "you're right. So tell me who you are." "Not yet." "Why not?" He looked at her, and the look was direct enough that it was almost uncomfortable, not aggressive, but the kind of eye contact that doesn't have any performance in it. "Because it's going to change the way you're looking at this situation. And right now I need you thinking clearly about what you know. Not reacting to what I tell you." She held his gaze. She was trying to determine if what he'd just said was manipulation or genuine operational logic, and the frustrating thing was that it sounded like both. "Fine," she said. "The board meeting is in 90 minutes. My evidence is locked in a server I can't physically access. My COO has just announced to the entire company that I've had an emotional breakdown. And a man I've known for 11 years just had me shoved across a lobby while my own security guards surrounded me." She looked at the equipment racks. "What can you actually do from down here?" "More than Malcolm thinks." Declan turned back to the terminal. "Your building management system has a secondary access layer that Malcolm installed. But the building's original maintenance network is separate. Older, runs on different architecture." He started typing. "I can get into the maintenance network through this terminal. The maintenance network has read access to system logs, not write access, but enough to document what's been done. Security access logs, communication records, elevator override commands. Everything Malcolm has done through the building system in the past 7 weeks." She understood immediately. A paper trail. A digital one. "Which is better." He kept typing. "If I can pull those logs and get them to the right people before the board meeting, Malcolm can't reframe the evidence as yours. The evidence becomes the building itself. Can you do that without him knowing you're in the system? For a while. He'll see an active connection on the maintenance terminal eventually, but the building's running hundreds of diagnostic processes right now because of the elevated security alert he triggered. One more active terminal is noise." He paused. 30 minutes, maybe, before the noise becomes a signal. And after 30 minutes, we move. Vivienne walked to the other side of the small room and leaned against the wall. The conduit above her head vibrated faintly, some HVAC component cycling on in the building's infrastructure, the kind of sound you never heard from the executive floor, but that was constant down here. The building's heartbeat, the mechanical and unglamorous version of it. She thought about the board meeting. She thought about 11 years of watching Malcolm Sayer be the most measured, reliable, well-regarded person in any room he entered, the man who always had the answer, who always smoothed the difficult conversation, who always made the quarterly numbers make sense even when they shouldn't have. 11 years of trusting him the way you trust a structural beam. Trusting him without testing it, because testing it had seemed unnecessary. She thought about how much she didn't know she hadn't known. There were employees, she said, 3 of them in the past month, who came to me with concerns about authorization irregularities in contract reporting. I looked into it. The documentation Malcolm provided said the irregularities were data entry errors. She stopped. He provided me with documentation that he had created himself. Declan didn't look up from the terminal. Yes, the contracts in question were defense-related. Aerospace components, military procurement. She paused. The kind of contracts where inflated figures don't just affect North Star's books, they affect government procurement. Taxpayer money. That's why the methodology is what it is, Declan said. He'd been expecting her to get here, watching her work through it in the same way he'd been working through it from a different direction. Whatever's in those defense contracts, the exposure isn't just corporate fraud. It's the kind of exposure that ends careers and begins federal investigations. Malcolm needed to remove you before you presented today because you're not just a threat to his position. You're a threat to whatever arrangement he's made outside this company. Who is he working with? I don't know yet. But the architecture of what's been installed in your building system, the methodology behind it, it has a history that I recognize. And that history didn't come from Malcolm's defense contractor days. He stopped typing. Read something on the screen. It came from somewhere else. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him read, and watched what he was reading do something to his expression that he was working to keep still. A man who'd had a lot of practice at keeping still and was being tested by whatever was on that screen. What? She said. He turned to look at her. The surveillance system that this methodology is derived from it was an abandoned military program. Classified. Designed for monitoring foreign infrastructure networks without detection. He paused. I know about it because I was present on the last deployment where it was used. 3 months before it was officially shut down. The room was very quiet, except for the building's mechanical breathing. You were military, she said. He didn't answer, which was the same as a yes. Navy, she said, because the way he moved, the way he navigated, the particular quality of his watchfulness, she'd been putting it together since the lobby. Special operations. He closed the diagnostic program. The logs are downloading. About 20 minutes of data before the connection becomes detectable. He started disconnecting his tablet. We need to find a way to reach your board members directly. Not through the building's communication system. Personal phones, personal email, something Malcolm can't intercept or override. You're changing the subject. I'm continuing the subject, he said. The subject is getting you to that board meeting with enough evidence to stop what Malcolm is doing. My background is relevant to understanding the methodology behind the attack. It's not relevant to what happens in the next 90 minutes. She studied him. The faded gray shirt, the contractor lanyard still hanging around his neck, the toolbox that was apparently carrying a diagnostic tablet that no building systems technician had any reason to own. A man who navigated hostile environments by instinct, who read security configurations like a language he'd spoken since childhood, who had walked into an active lobby takeover and disrupted it without touching anyone aggressively, who had, she remembered, predicted exactly where the additional guards would appear and been right to the second. You have a daughter, she said. He looked up, and for the first time, she'd found the thing that moved his expression without him being able to stop it. Not alarm, exactly. Something more exposed than alarm. Something personal. The parent-teacher conference, she said. You mentioned it to one of my employees when you were checking in. 4 o'clock. She paused. You plan to be done here by 2. He held her gaze.
Yes, how old?
8. She nodded slowly. That piece of information rearranged something in what she understood about the situation. A man who had walked between her and 3 armed guards, and who was running a counter-operation against a sophisticated building systems hack who had checked his watch twice since they'd entered this corridor. "We'll get you out by 4, she said. It came out more gently than she'd intended, which surprised her. She wasn't accustomed to being the one offering reassurance in a crisis. But the look on his face when she'd mentioned his daughter was the most unguarded thing she'd seen in the past hour, and something in her responded to it instinctively. He cleared his expression, picked up his toolbox. "We need to move to the east stairwell," he said. "There's a secondary electrical junction on floor 7 that has a hardwired connection to the boardroom's AV system. If I can access it, I can feed the log data directly to the boardroom displays, regardless of whether Malcolm has the presentation system locked down. Floor 7 requires a security badge. I know. Mine's suspended. I know." She waited. "Third door on the left from the elevator bank on 7, he said. "Facility storage. The physical key code hasn't been updated since the system migration 18 months ago because it's a low-traffic room. It's still on the old 6-digit format." He looked at her. "What's your facility's override code? The one you were issued when you became CEO." She stared at him. "How do you know that exists?" "Every building this size has one. Issued to the CEO and the facilities director. Meant for physical access emergencies." She thought about whether she trusted him. Really thought about it for about 4 seconds, which was all the time she had. Then she told him the code. He memorized it without writing it down, which she expected. "East stairwell," he said. "Stay close. Don't use your badge on anything any swipe will register your location in the system." She fell into step behind him as he opened the hub room door and checked the corridor. "You know what the most terrifying thing about all of this is?" she said. He glanced back at her. "It's not Malcolm. It's not losing the company. It's that 400 people were in that lobby, and only one person moved." She paused. "And I don't even know his name." He was quiet for a moment. "Declan," he said. "Vivienne." "I know," he said. "You're on the building directory, too." She almost laughed. She didn't, because there wasn't room for it yet. But it came close, and that was something she hadn't expected to feel in the middle of what was turning out to be the worst day of her professional life. They moved into the corridor, heading east. 2 floors above them, Malcolm Sayer received a notification on his phone. A maintenance terminal on B level had registered an active connection 30 seconds ago. His network monitor had flagged it as anomalous. He looked at the notification for a long moment. Then he forwarded it to Derek Morrow with a single line of text. "Find them." "Don't wait." Derek read the message. He assembled 4 men, not the compromised lobby guards, who were too exposed now. Different men. The ones Malcolm had positioned in the building that morning under cover of legitimate vendor access, who had been waiting in a second-floor conference room for exactly this kind of instruction. They moved toward the east stairwell. And on the 7th floor, 2 floors above, where Declan and Vivienne were climbing, the board of directors of North Star Aeronautics was filing into a conference room where Malcolm Sayer was already standing at the presentation podium, his expression composed and sorrowful in the way of a man delivering difficult news about someone he respected, with a set of documents arranged in front of him that he had spent 7 weeks preparing. The clock on the wall read 12:43, 82 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, which meant Malcolm was starting early, which meant he was more afraid than he looked. The east stairwell smelled like old paint and something faintly metallic, the kind of smell that accumulates in spaces people only use when the elevators are broken or when they're having the kind of conversation they don't want recorded. The emergency lighting gave everything a yellowish cast that made both of them look tired, which in Vivienne's case was accurate and in Declan's case was irrelevant, because he moved like tiredness wasn't something that applied to him yet. They were on the 4th floor landing when they heard the door above them open. Declan stopped. His hand came up, not a dramatic gesture, just a slight lift of the fingers that meant stop without requiring words. Vivienne stopped immediately, which told him she was someone who could read a situation without needing it explained, which was useful. Footsteps. More than one person. Coming down from above, moving with the particular cadence of people trying to be quiet and not entirely succeeding. Declan looked at the 4th floor door, then at Vivienne. He tilted his head toward the door, and she nodded, and they went through it without making noise. The fourth floor was mid-level corporate open plan, rows of workstations. The quiet industry of people trying to look like they were focused on their screens while clearly listening to every sound the building made. About 60 employees visible from the stairwell exit. Most of them glanced up when the door opened. Several recognized Vivienne immediately. Declan kept moving, angling them away from the central work area toward the north corridor, where the smaller offices and conference rooms provided cover. He could feel 60 sets of eyes tracking them across the floor, and he knew that within 2 minutes someone would make a phone call or send a message, and the question was whether it would go to Malcolm's people or to someone else. A woman in her 40s stepped away from her workstation and moved to intercept them. Declan tensed slightly, but the woman's body language was all wrong for aggression. She was moving carefully, deliberately, and she was looking at Vivienne with an expression that was something between relief and distress.
Ms. Rowe.
Her voice was low. Her badge read Patricia Haynes, Senior Contract Analyst. I've been trying to reach your office since this morning. I was one of the people who tried to flag the authorization irregularities last month. Vivienne stopped. Patricia. Malcolm Zinsman. Patricia paused and glanced around the floor. Most of us don't believe it. I've worked here 9 years. I know what an emotional breakdown looks like, and I know what a cover story looks like. She looked at Declan, then back at Vivienne. What do you need? Vivienne looked at Declan. A room with a hardwired network connection and a door that locks, he said. Patricia nodded without hesitation. Conference room 4C. I have the key. The lock's manual, it won't register in the building system. She led them through the north corridor without looking like she was leading them anywhere, which was the right instinct. The conference room was small and windowless, the kind of room used for calls that needed privacy rather than meetings that needed space. One table, 4 chairs, a wall-mounted screen, and a network access panel on the back wall with a physical Ethernet port that hadn't been used since the wireless upgrade 3 years ago. Declan went straight to the panel. The board meeting, Vivienne said to Patricia. Malcolm's already started. Do you know who's in that room? 7 board members. Mr. Sayer had them called in early. He told the administrative staff it was a quorum emergency. Patricia hesitated. He's been in contact with 3 of them regularly for the past month. Private meetings, no calendar entries. I only know because I handle conference room scheduling. Which 3? Patricia named them. Vivienne's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes recalculated. The 3 most senior members, she said, mostly to herself. The ones whose votes would carry the most procedural weight if they needed to ratify an emergency leadership transition. Yes, Patricia said. Declan had the network panel open and his tablet connected. The Ethernet port was live old infrastructure running on the building's original network backbone rather than the updated managed system. It was slower and less capable, but it was also completely outside the control layer Malcolm had installed. I can reach the boardroom's AV system from here, he said. Same hardwired backbone, but I need the log data I pulled from the B-level terminal transmitted to the display before I can... He stopped, looked at the tablet screen. The download was interrupted when we left the hub room. I got about 60% of the logs. Is 60% enough? Vivienne asked. Depends what's in it. He started reviewing the partial data. Malcolm's access history, communication records, the override commands he used this morning, most of that should be in the first 60%. Question is whether the financial authorization data is. Vivienne moved to stand beside him and look at the screen. The contracts in question are coded under project identifiers. If you see references to Project Halcyon or Project Meridian in those logs, that's the fraudulent billing. He scrolled. Found the first Halcyon reference 40 seconds later. There, she said. How many transactions are we looking at? 43 separate authorizations over 18 months. Malcolm's digital signature on each one. She paused. And mine on several of them, because he submitted them through the standard approval workflow, and I countersigned without knowing what I was countersigning. He was building a fallback, Declan said. Your signature on the approvals. If the fraud was ever discovered, he had documentation making you appear equally responsible. Which is why he needed today to work, she said. If I presented the evidence to the board before he could control the narrative, his fallback became useless because the sequence of events would be clear. But if he could remove me, first discredit me, have me suspended, manufacture a paper trail making me look unstable. She stopped. The full architecture of it was visible to her now, all at once, and it was the kind of thing that lands differently when you see it whole than it did when you were only seeing pieces. 11 years, she said quietly. He spent 11 years building a reputation that made him untouchable, and then he used that reputation as the foundation for this. Patricia, who had been standing quietly by the door, said, "There are others who knew something was wrong. Not just me. People who noticed things that didn't add up and stayed quiet. Because Malcolm is Malcolm. Because you don't question Malcolm Sayer and come out of it looking like anything other than a troublemaker." "You came to me," Vivienne said. "I came to you," Patricia said. "And Malcolm told you it was data entry errors, and you believed him. And I went back to my desk and thought about whether I still had the nerve to push it." She paused. "I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder." "So should I," Vivienne said. The room was quiet for a moment with the specific weight of two people acknowledging, without drama, that they had both made the mistake of trusting the wrong person. Declan kept working. He had the AV connection, established within 4 minutes, not clean, not perfect. The hardwired path to the boardroom display operating at a fraction of normal bandwidth, but functional enough to push data. Question was timing. Malcolm was already presenting. The board members who were aligned with him would be receiving his version of events right now, and first impressions in a room like that had the same problem they had. Everywhere else, they stuck. "Patricia," Declan said without looking up. "Is there anyone on that board you'd characterize as independent? Someone who came into today's meeting without prior alignment to Malcolm?" "Renata Voss," Patricia said immediately. "She's been on the board 4 years. She's the one who pushed for the independent ethics review 2 years ago that Malcolm managed to delay until it died quietly." A pause. "She and Ms. Rowe have a cordial relationship." Vivienne nodded. "Renata doesn't trust easily, which means she doesn't untrust easily either." She looked at Declan. "If she's hearing Malcolm's version right now, she's already picking holes in it. Can you reach her directly, personal phone?" "I have her number." "But my phone," she checked it. "Malcolm's team has flagged my number. Any call from my phone to a board member will register in the communication monitoring system he's running." "Patricia's phone won't," Declan said. Patricia pulled her phone out before he finished the sentence. Vivienne took it. Dialed from memory, the kind of number you memorize because you've used it enough times that it becomes part of the furniture of your professional life. She held the phone to her ear and waited. It rang 4 times. Then, "Patricia, this isn't a good time." "Renata?" "It's Vivienne." Silence. A different quality of silence than the kind that comes from surprise, the silence of a person who is doing rapid and precise thinking. "Where are you?" Renata Voss said. "In the building." "4th floor." "I'm fine." A pause. "What is Malcolm telling you?" "That you've suffered a mental health episode under the stress of the past quarter, and that an unknown individual has taken you off building premises against your will." Another pause. "He has documentation. Personnel reports, messages from your office account that he says indicate you were planning to misrepresent financial data to the board. Messages from my office account that he generated using his administrative access to the communication system," Vivienne said. "Which I can prove. I'm going to send you something in about 5 minutes. I need you to look at it before the vote." "There's already been a preliminary motion," Renata said. 3 board members seconded it before I could. "I know which 3. "I need 5 minutes, Renata." A longer pause this time. Declan could hear, faintly, the ambient sound of the boardroom through the phone, the low murmur of conversation, the particular acoustic flatness of a room full of people trying to sound like they aren't in the middle of something. 5 minutes, Renata said. "I'll stall." The call ended. Vivienne handed the phone back to Patricia and looked at Declan. "Can you push the logs to the boardroom display in 5 minutes?" 4, he said. He was already running the transfer. "There's a problem." She waited. "The boardroom display is currently running Malcolm's presentation. If I push the log data, it overrides his display. He'll know immediately where it's coming from, this terminal, this floor." He glanced at her. "He'll send people here." "He's already sent people," Vivienne said. Those were his men in the stairwell. Yes. But right now they're looking in the stairwells and on the lower floors. Once I push the data, they'll know exactly where we are. She absorbed this. How long do we need after the push? Long enough for Renata Voss to look at what she's seeing and ask the right questions. Long enough for at least one board member to pick up a phone and call someone outside this building. He paused. 5 minutes, maybe. Could be less if Malcolm moves fast. And if they reach us before that? He didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, and he was looking at the terminal screen, with an expression she was beginning to learn the focused, inward look of a man running calculations that weren't mathematical. What happened in the stairwell, she said. The way you stopped. The way you moved us through the floor without you've done that before. Not once. Many times he kept looking at the screen. The surveillance methodology. The military program. She paused. You weren't just present on the deployment where it was used. You were operational. He closed his eyes briefly. Opened them. Yes. Navy SEAL. The word landed in the room and stayed there. How long? She asked. 12 years active. 6 years ago I separated. He still wasn't looking at her. My wife died, 18 months into my last deployment. I came home, and Ruby was 7 months old and being looked after by my wife's sister, who was 22 and doing the best she could, and clearly needed someone to actually take over. He paused. So I did. Vivienne didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't diminish it. I had offers, he said. Private security, contracting, consulting. Kind of work that would have kept me in that world and paid 3 times what I make now. He finally looked up from the screen. Ruby needed a father who came home. Not a check, not a legend. A father who was there when she went to sleep and there when she woke up. His voice was level, completely level, and she had the sense that the levelness was the thing he'd built over 6 years of practice, and that underneath it was something that had cost him more than the work ever had. So I learned building systems, and I went home every night. Patricia had turned slightly toward the door, giving them the privacy of her back, which was a thoughtful thing to do. The program you recognized, Vivienne said, the surveillance methodology. You know it because you used it. I know it because I helped develop the field protocols for it. And because I was on the team that determined it was too dangerous to deploy at scale and recommended it be shut down. He looked back at the screen. Someone didn't shut it down. They took it and adapted it for this kind of use. Corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, hostile anything. The methodology is agnostic. It works on any network building system. He paused. The people who built what's running in North Star's infrastructure right now, they had access to classified military documentation. Which means either someone leaked it or someone who was cleared for it went into a different line of work. She thought about Malcolm's background. 8 years at a defense contractor, a large one, with government clearances and military contracts. Kind of company where classified methodology could move laterally in 100 quiet ways. Can you identify who built it? She said. From what you've seen in the logs? Maybe. Given time, he looked at her. We don't have time right now. No, she agreed. We don't. He turned back to the terminal. Transfer was at 73%. The partial log data was moving through the hardwired backbone at the reduced speed of infrastructure that had been old when the iPhone was new, and every second of it felt pressurized in a way that was different from the pressure of the lobby or the stairwell. This was the pressure of knowing that the most important movement in the whole situation wasn't physical, it was data, moving through old copper wire at the speed of something almost too slow to matter. Tricia's head turned slightly toward the door. Someone in the main floor area just made a phone call, she said quietly. I can't hear what they said, but they moved to the far side of the room to make it. Could be anything, Vivienne said. Could be, Patricia agreed, in a tone that suggested she didn't think it was. Declan checked the transfer. 81%. The boardroom display connection was live and waiting. Renata Voss had apparently done something on her end to pause Malcolm's presentation, because the AV system had registered an input hold 60 seconds ago. He didn't know how she'd managed it, and it didn't matter. Tell me about Ruby, Vivienne said. He looked up, surprised by the question. It was the kind of question you ask when you're trying to keep someone or yourself grounded in something that matters. What do you want to know? Anything. She paused. What is she like? He was quiet for a moment, dinosaurs. She's been through a dinosaur phase that started 14 months ago and shows no sign of ending. She has opinions about which ones are underrated. He paused. Her current position is that Pachycephalosaurus doesn't get enough respect. Something in Vivienne's face shifted. She sounds specific. She is extremely specific. A brief pause. She also cries at commercials. The ones with dogs. Every time without fail she cries. He glanced down. She gets that from her mother. Or so her aunt tells me. The transfer hit 94%. The door of the conference room moved. Not opening, just a slight shift, the kind that happens when someone outside puts his hand on the handle and applies pressure before turning it. Declan was on his feet before anyone else registered what they'd seen. He crossed the room in 2 steps and put his back against the wall beside the door frame, which put him out of the immediate sight line of anyone who entered. Patricia stepped back. Vivienne held still, the handle turned. The door opened. The man who came through it was not one of Malcolm's security team. He was young, mid-20s, and the standard business casual of a junior analyst, with the expression of someone who was genuinely uncertain whether what they were about to do was the right thing or a career-ending mistake. He stopped when he saw Vivienne, stopped more completely when he registered Declan against the wall to his left. "I'm not," he raised both hands, palms out, the universal gesture of a person who does not want to be misread. "I'm not here for Malcolm. I work in contract compliance. My name is Owen Cho." He was talking to Vivienne but looking at Declan, because Declan was the more immediate variable. "I've been trying to reach the board's independent auditor for 3 weeks. I found something in the Meridian contract filings that—" "Sit down," Vivienne said. He sat. "How did you know we were in this room?" "Patricia." He looked at the senior analyst. "I saw her bring you through the floor. I've been watching for Ms. Rowe all morning. I got to work early because I knew today was the board presentation, and I thought—" He stopped. "I didn't know it was going to be like this. I thought if I could get to Ms. Rowe before the meeting, I could give her what I found and she could." "What did you find?" Declan said. Owen Cho reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a folded set of documents. Physical documents, printed and folded, slightly damp at the corners from what Declan suspected was the young man's hands. He'd been carrying them for a while. "The Meridian contract has a secondary disbursement pathway," Owen said. "It's buried in the payment routing documentation. I almost missed it. Money comes in from the government procurement account in the standard way, but 12% of each payment is automatically rerouted to a holding company before it hits North Star's operating accounts. The holding company is registered in Delaware under a name that doesn't connect to North Star on paper." He looked at Vivienne. "But the beneficial owner, the person who actually controls that holding company, I traced it through 3 layers of shell registration." "Malcolm," Vivienne said. "No," Owen said. He paused. "Well, yes, Malcolm is connected, but he's the second name on the beneficial owner documentation. The first name, the person at the top of the structure, I didn't recognize them. But I looked them up." He unfolded the documents and placed them on the table. "He's a former defense industry executive, retired 8 years ago. His name is Leonard Vane." The name meant nothing to Vivienne. She looked at Declan. Declan's expression had gone through something she couldn't entirely read, not surprise, exactly, but the particular quality of a piece falling into place that you'd known was missing, but hadn't known the shape of. "You know that name," she said. "Leonard Vane," he said carefully, "was the program director for the military surveillance project I was involved with. He oversaw its development and signed the shutdown documentation." He paused. "If he signed the shutdown and then took the methodology private—" "He didn't shut it down," Vivienne said. "He privatized it, and spent the years since finding clients who could use it." Declan looked at the documents Owen had placed on the table. "Malcolm isn't the top of this. Malcolm's a facilitator. Someone who provided access and inside knowledge of North Star in exchange for a cut of the contract fraud." He paused. "Vane is the architect. The transfer hit 100%. The boardroom display, 7 floors above them, flickered. Declan crossed back to the terminal in 3 steps and confirmed the transmission. The full log data, 60% of the original pull, which had turned out to contain everything that mattered, was now displaying on the boardroom's main 6 screen. Access records, override commands, communication logs, The Halcyon and Meridian authorization trail, with Malcolm's digital signature rendered in the clear, unambiguous formatting of a system that had no reason to lie. He could only imagine what it looked like from inside that room. Malcolm, mid-sentence, probably, or in the middle of a carefully constructed argument, and then the display behind him going to something he had not put there and could not immediately explain. Renata will call for a recess, Vivienne said. She was looking at the ceiling, as if she could see through 7 floors of concrete and steel. She'll call for a recess and she'll start making calls. How long before Malcolm understands what just happened and where it came from? He already knows, Declan said. The terminal registered the push. He knows we're on 4. As if to confirm it, they heard the stairwell door at the end of the north corridor open. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving fast. Owen Cho looked at the door of the conference room, and then at Declan, with the expression of someone who had genuinely not anticipated this particular development when he'd decided to bring his folded documents to work this morning. Is this, he started. Stay with Patricia, Declan said. Both of you. Don't open that door until you hear Vivienne's voice. And if we don't hear it, Patricia said. Declan picked up his toolbox. Then open it anyway and walk to the nearest exit. The lobby lockdown won't hold once the board recess starts. Malcolm won't risk the visibility of a locked building when there are board members in it who aren't aligned with him. You don't know that, Vivienne said. No, he agreed. But it's the most likely red. He looked at her. Can you run? She looked down at her shoes. Low heels, not flats, but manageable. I can move. I need to reach the 7th floor without using the east stairwell. What's the alternative? West stairwell requires badge access on every floor. Freight elevator? South side of the building. It runs on manual call, no badge required, but it's slow. Too slow. He thought for 3 seconds. The HVAC maintenance ladder. It connects floor by floor through the building's interior. Access panels on every other floor. He stared at him. That's not a real option for... It's faster than the stairs if the stairs are compromised, and I know where the panels are from the work order documentation. He looked at her. You've been moving well. Can you handle a maintenance ladder for 3 floors? She held his gaze for a moment. You're a very strange building systems technician, she said. I know. She straightened her jacket. Lead the way. They went out the north corridor's secondary exit, a utility door that opened onto a maintenance passageway running parallel to the main corridor, exactly where Declan had noted it on the floor plan he'd memorized before his first North Star visit, just as the footsteps from the stairwell reached the conference room area behind them. They heard the conference room door being tried. Then, faintly, Patricia Haynes' voice, carrying through the wall with the particular steadiness of a 9-year North Star employee, who had already decided this morning that she was done staying quiet. Can I help you? It bought them 30 seconds, maybe 40. Declan moved through the maintenance passage toward the interior access panel with his toolbox in one hand, and Vivienne a step behind him. The passage was barely wide enough for both of them, and the ceiling was low enough that he had to angle slightly, and the light was a single bulb on a pull cord that he didn't pull. He found the access panel by memory and touch, unlatched it in 4 seconds, and revealed a vertical shaft with a metal ladder running up through the building's interior, the kind of utilitarian infrastructure that exists in every large building and is used almost exclusively by people who are trying to get somewhere quietly. He looked at Vivienne. She looked at the ladder. 3 floors, he said. 3 floors, she said. She went up first. He followed, pulling the panel shut behind him, and the shaft closed around them, close, dark, smelling of insulation and the industrial lubricant on the ladder rails and 7 floors above them. In a boardroom where Malcolm Sayer was looking at a display screen he hadn't authorized and trying to keep his face from showing what he was actually feeling, Renata Voss called for an immediate recess and picked up her phone and dialed a number that was not on any North Star internal directory. The maintenance shaft was not designed for 2 people, and it made that clear in every possible way. The ladder rungs were cold and slightly greasy with the accumulated residue of a building that hadn't had anyone climb this particular route in what felt like years. The shaft was narrow enough that Vivienne's shoulders brushed both walls when she reached across to grip each rung, and the darkness above and below them had the particular quality of darkness in enclosed vertical spaces, Not just the absence of light, but the presence of depth, the awareness of how far down the bottom was. Climbed without complaining, which Declan noted. She wasn't fast, but she was steady, and she didn't pause to look down, which was the right instinct. He climbed below her, toolbox hooked over one forearm in a way that was awkward enough to slow him but not enough to stop him. And he counted rungs by feel, the way he'd once counted heartbeats in situations where counting was the only thing that kept the operational part of his brain from getting crowded out by the rest of it. Fifth floor access panel was above them, then the sixth, then the seventh. He'd told her 3 floors. It was 3 floors, technically. It just felt like more. "You do this often?" she said from above him. Her voice was slightly compressed with the effort of climbing. Maintenance ladders, running toward the problem instead of away from it. He thought about that for a moment. "Used to," he said. "Professionally. And now? Now I try to stick to control panels." She made a sound that might have been a laugh if there had been more air for it. They kept climbing. The 7th floor access panel was latched from the inside the standard configuration, which Declan had anticipated, meaning he had to work one-handed with a flathead from his toolbox, while maintaining grip on the ladder with the other. Took longer than he wanted. About 45 seconds of him working the latch mechanism by feel, while Vivienne held her position above him, and the sounds from the building around them, footsteps, the distant closing of doors, the muffled traffic of a building in crisis, pressed against the shaft walls like water against a hull. Gave. The panel opened. 7th floor was executive support, the administrative layer beneath the actual executive suites, populated by assistants, schedulers, and the specific category of senior staff who worked close enough to power to understand it, but not close enough to be accountable for it. The floor had a different texture than 4, quieter, more controlled. The kind of quiet that comes from people who are paid specifically to manage information and are currently managing a great deal of it. The access panel opened into a supply closet. Declan came through first, checked the closet, opened its door 2 inches and checked the corridor, then brought Vivienne through. She emerged from the maintenance shaft with her blazer slightly askew, a grease mark on her left sleeve, and her hair showing the effects of a vertical climb through a metal shaft. She looked at herself briefly, with the expression of someone conducting a rapid damage assessment, then straightened her jacket and lifted her chin. "The boardroom," she said, 40 feet north corridor. He handed her a handkerchief from his toolbox. It was clean. He used it for wiping diagnostic equipment, and she looked at it for a half-second before understanding and wiping the grease mark with the focused efficiency of someone who does not have time to be precious about borrowed handkerchiefs. They moved into the corridor. The 7th floor was reacting to something. The administrative staff, who were visible through open office doors, were clustered in 2s and 3s, talking in the lowered voices of people sharing information they weren't sure they were supposed to share. 2 of them looked up when Vivienne appeared in the corridor. The recognition was immediate, and what followed was the particular frozen moment of employees encountering a situation their training had not covered. One of them, young woman, executive assistant badge, the specific alertness of someone who has been answering phones all morning and has heard too many things, took a step toward them. "Ms. Rowe," she said, "the board is in recess. Ms. Voss called it 8 minutes ago." She paused. "Mr. Sayer told us to. He told us to call security if we saw you." "Are you going to?" Vivienne said. The young woman looked at her for a moment, then at Declan, then back. "I've worked for you for 2 years," she said. "You remembered my mother was sick last April, and you ask about her every week for a month." She paused. "No, I'm not going to," Vivienne nodded. "Is the board still in the room?" The recess was called in the room. Ms. Voss asked that everyone stay put. "Mr. Sayer's been trying to restart the presentation for 8 minutes, and Ms. Voss has been." A slight pause, and something that was almost admiration moved across the assistant's face. "Ms. Voss has been making that very difficult for him." Declan was already moving toward the boardroom. Vivienne caught up with him in 2 steps. "He's going to try to frame the data dump as a security breach," she said. "He'll tell them I orchestrated it remotely, or that the data has been manipulated." "I know. Can you prove it hasn't been?" "The maintenance network logs have integrity timestamps. Every entry is date-stamped by the building's infrastructure clock, which is on a separate system from anything Malcolm has access to. You can't retroactively alter the timestamps without leaving marks that are visible to anyone who knows what to look for. He paused. But I need to be in that room to explain that, because Malcolm will find someone to cast doubt on it, and the board members who are aligned with him will use that doubt. You're going to walk into the North Star boardroom, she said. In that shirt. He glanced down at himself, faded gray work shirt, contractor lanyard, toolbox. The grease from the maintenance shaft had added a new dimension to the shirt's biography. You have a better option, he said. She almost smiled. No, I really don't. The boardroom doors were closed, heavy mahogany doors with brushed steel handles, the kind of doors designed to communicate that decisions made on the other side of them carry weight. A security guard was posted outside, one of North Star's actual staff rather than Malcolm's imports, wearing the updated credentials Declan had noted as absent from the lobby team that morning. The guard straightened when he saw them. His hand moved toward his radio. Don't, Vivienne said. Her voice carried the particular quality of authority that doesn't need volume, the kind that comes from years of being the person in the room that decisions pass through. That's a direct instruction from your CEO. Step aside. The guard looked at Declan, then at Vivienne. He was young, early 30s, the career-building years where you're constantly calculating which version of a decision you can live with longer. Ma'am, he said. Carefully, Mr. Sayer has invoked Section 14 Mines. Section 14 requires a documented medical assessment from a licensed professional and a vote of no less than 5 board members, Vivienne said. Has a licensed professional assessed me today? Has there been a board vote? The guard opened his mouth, closed it. I am your CEO, she said, and I am entering my boardroom. You can radio this to whoever you need to radio it to, and I understand that you're in a genuinely difficult position right now, and I will remember that you were professional about it. The guard stepped aside. Declan opened the door. The boardroom of North Star Aeronautics was a long room with a long table, 12 chairs, 7 of them occupied, a presentation screen at the far end that was currently displaying the log data that Declan had pushed from the 4th floor. The data was still there, cycling through the access records and communication logs in the clean, unforgiving formatting of system documentation that had not been designed to be pretty or persuasive, only accurate. Malcolm Sacer was standing at the presentation podium, and the expression on his face when the door opened went through 3 distinct phases in the space of about 1 second. The first was surprise. The second was something calculating and rapid. The third was the settled, controlled expression of a man who has prepared for contingencies and is now selecting among them. Around the table, 7 faces turned. Renata Voss was at the far end, seated with the upright posture of a woman who has been holding a room in check through sheer force of procedure for the past 8 minutes. And the expression she turned on Vivienne was the expression of someone who has been waiting for a cavalry that she wasn't entirely sure was coming. 3 of the other board members, the ones Patricia had named, the ones who had been in private meetings with Malcolm for the past month, showed the particular blankness of people recalibrating. Not guilt, not yet. Just the rapid internal revision of people who have committed to one side of a story and have just watched the other side walk through a door. Vivienne. Malcolm's voice was exactly what it always was measured, warm in a way that was technically indistinguishable from genuine. The voice of a man who had spent 11 years perfecting the sound of trustworthiness. I'm relieved you're safe. Stop, she said. He stopped. She walked to the table. She didn't take her usual chair, the one at the head nearest the door. She walked the length of the room and stood beside the presentation screen, beside the log data that was cycling through its entries, and she turned to face the room with her back straight and the grease mark still faintly visible on her left sleeve. I want to introduce someone, she said. His name is Declan Shaw. He came to this building this morning to repair a control panel in the basement, and instead of doing that, he spent the past 2 hours helping me stay alive and functional while your COO attempted a corporate takeover using a hijacked building security system and imported personnel operating on unauthorized frequencies. She looked at the board. What you're looking at on that screen are the logs from North Star's building management system, pulled from the maintenance secondary access layer, which is on a completely separate infrastructure from anything Mr. Sayer has administrative access to. The data has integrity timestamps that cannot be retroactively altered. Mr. Shaw can walk you through the technical verification if any board member wants it. Malcolm had recovered himself. Vivienne, I understand that you've been under tremendous stress. Malcolm. It was Renata Voss. She said it in the tone of a woman who does not enjoy interrupting people and will do it anyway when necessary. We have been looking at those logs for 8 minutes. I want to hear from Ms. Rowe before I hear from you again. Please sit down. Malcolm did not sit down, but he stopped talking, which was a different kind of capitulation, the kind where a man is still calculating whether there's a version of this he can win. Declan set his toolbox down beside the door and crossed to the presentation system. The boardroom's AV setup was more sophisticated than the maintenance terminal he'd used to push the data, and it took him 40 seconds to navigate to the log management interface and pull up the time-stamped verification display. It wasn't a presentation he'd prepared. It was a direct look at the building system's own internal documentation, raw and unbeatified, which was exactly what it needed to be. The integrity timestamp system runs on the building's infrastructure clock, he said. Separate from the managed network, separate from the security system, separate from anything that has been modified in the past 7 weeks. Every entry in these logs carries a timestamp that was written by a system Malcolm Sayer does not have administrative access to. He highlighted the relevant column in the data display. You can verify this independently by requesting the infrastructure clock logs from your building's original installation vendor. The vendor credentials are in your facilities documentation. One of the 3 aligned board members, a man in his 60s named Hartford, whose corporate biography described him as a 30-year finance industry veteran, leaned forward. How do we know you haven't manipulated the logs before transmitting them? Declan looked at him. You cross-reference the maintenance network data with your standard security system logs. Both systems recorded the same events. If I had altered the maintenance logs, the standard security logs would show discrepancies. They don't. He paused. You can also have your IT department pull the raw transmission data from the hardwired network connection on the 4th floor and trace the data path back to its source. The transmission is logged. It's not something you can fake retroactively. Hartford said nothing more. He sat back with the expression of a man who had asked the question he'd been handed to ask and received an answer that was going to require more preparation to counter than he currently had. Malcolm moved, not toward the table, toward Declan. A measured walk, the walk of a man who was going to have a reasonable conversation with an unreasonable person, which was the last frame he had available. Mr. Shaw, he said, I don't know what Vivienne has told you about this situation, but I want you to understand that what you're doing, what you've helped facilitate this morning, carries serious legal exposure for you. You entered this building under contractor credentials, interfered with security personnel, and have now accessed and transmitted internal corporate data without authorization. Declan looked at him. The maintenance terminal I used is accessible to any contractor with a valid building access credential. My credential is valid. The secondary Ethernet port I used on the 4th floor is part of the building's emergency communication infrastructure, which is explicitly available to authorized contractors under Section 7 of Northstar's Facilities Access Agreement. He paused. I read the agreement before my first visit. Malcolm stared at him. You read the Facilities Access Agreement, he said, with the tone of a man testing whether he'd heard correctly. I read most things, Declan said. Vivienne, standing beside the screen, had the expression of someone who is working very hard to maintain the appropriate gravity of the situation and finding it slightly difficult. Financial documentation, she said, redirecting the room. The board was convened today to review evidence of fraudulent billing in the Halcyon and Meridian defense contracts. I want to present that evidence now. She looked at Malcolm. Sit down, Malcolm. You can't. I am the CEO of this company. Section 14 has not been formally invoked because the procedural requirements have not been met, a fact that Renata was kind enough to establish for the record 8 minutes ago. She held his gaze. Down. The room held its breath. Malcolm Sayer sat down. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't accompanied by any visible change in his expression or posture. He sat down the way a man sits down when he's decided that the next phase of a fight requires him to appear cooperative, and everyone in the room who was paying attention understood exactly what it was. And 3 of those people were relieved to be watching it happen from the safe distance of a decision they hadn't fully committed to yet. Vivienne presented for 40 minutes. She worked from memory and from Owen Cho's documents, which Declan had thought to photograph with his tablet before they left the fourth floor. The copies now displayed on the boardroom screen alongside the system logs. She presented the Halcyon and Meridian Authorization Trail, the disbursement pathway to the Delaware Holding Company, the beneficial ownership structure terminating at Leonard Vane. She presented the timeline, Malcolm's extended administrative access request, the building system compromise, beginning 53 days ago, the gradual lockout of employees who had raised questions about the contract irregularities, preparation of fabricated communications from her office account. She was not perfect doing it. She lost her place twice, once on the Meridian timeline, once when she pulled up a document and the wrong one came forward. She corrected both without comment, the way a person corrects mistakes when they're too focused on the substance to be embarrassed by the mechanics. Renata Voss asked questions throughout. Good questions, the kind that sound like challenges, but are actually the structural support that a presentation needs to stand up. The questions that let a speaker demonstrate that they can defend what they're saying from multiple angles. The three aligned board members asked no questions. They sat with the specific stillness of people who have decided the most important thing, right now, is to make themselves difficult to read. Hartford, the finance veteran, asked one question near the end. He asked it carefully, in the measured tone of a man constructing a retreat route while maintaining the appearance of engagement. The beneficial owner documentation, he said. How was that obtained? By an employee in contract compliance who followed a paper trail through the standard payment routing documentation, Vivienne said. His name is Owen Cho. He's been trying to reach the board's independent auditor for 3 weeks. She paused. He brought the documents to me this morning in a conference room on the 4th floor because the building's communication systems had been compromised and he didn't trust digital channels. Hartford looked at Malcolm. Malcolm said nothing. He was looking at the table in front of him, with the fascinated expression of a man who has decided to stop generating losses. Renata Voss looked at the screen, then at Vivienne, then at Declan, who had been standing near the AV system since his brief technical explanation and had not moved or spoken since, existing in the room with the same quality of contained stillness that Vivienne had noticed in the lobby 3 hours ago, not invisible, just deliberately non-central. Mr. Shaw, Renata said. He looked at her. You are a building systems technician, she said, with the careful diction of someone who is not asking what they appear to be asking. That's what my contractor credential says, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. She was in her late 50s, with the specific quality of alertness that belongs to people who have spent decades in rooms where the most important information is always the information that isn't being said directly. What does your contractor credential not say? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. That's a longer answer than the current situation requires, he said. What it's relevant to know right now is that I recognize the methodology behind the building system compromise because I've seen it before, in a context that makes the involvement of Leonard Vane significant beyond the financial fraud. Vane was the director of a classified military surveillance program. The same technical framework was used to build the override system in your building. If Vane is operating that technology commercially, the legal exposure extends well beyond corporate fraud. The room absorbed this. Who do we call? Renata said. And I mean specifically not a general suggestion. Who do we call right now to get people into this building, who have the authority and the clearance to deal with the full scope of what you're describing? Declan reached into his toolbox and removed a business card. It was not his own. It was worn at the corners, the kind of card that had been in a wallet for a long time without being used. Kept not because it was needed, but because the instinct that made him keep. It was the same instinct that made him read facilities agreements and memorize building layouts. He placed it on the table. That's a federal contact in the Defense Oversight Division, he said. She'll know what Vane's name means. She'll know who to bring. Renata picked up the card. Read it. Set it down carefully, with the precise placement of someone who understands that small objects sometimes carry significant weight. How do you have this? She asked. I used to work with her, he said. A long time ago. He said it simply, without elaboration, and nobody in the room pushed on it, because there was something in the way he said it that communicated. without being combative about it, that the pushing would not produce more than he'd already given. Then Malcolm's phone buzzed on the table. It was face up. Declan could see the screen from where he was standing, and what he saw on it was a single line of text from a contact listed as an initial. Not a name, just a letter. The text said, "Stand down." Getting out. Malcolm read it. His expression didn't change. But his right hand, which had been resting flat on the table, curled very slightly at the fingers. The involuntary response of someone receiving information that has rearranged something fundamental. Leonard Vane was running. Declan looked at the card on the table, then at the door of the boardroom. Then he made a calculation that he recognized as the kind of calculation he'd made in different rooms. In different circumstances, for 12 years the calculation of available time versus required outcomes, of what could be preserved and what was already lost. The federal contact will need the building system logs secured before Vane can initiate a remote wipe, he said. He has access to the override layer, if he wipes it from outside. Can he do that? Renata said sharply, yes. He built it. There'll be a kill protocol. Declan was already moving back to the AV terminal. The only way to prevent it is to physically isolate the building management system from the external network connection. He looked at Vivienne. I need access to the primary network junction. Where is it? Basement level 1, she said immediately. The main server room. It requires executive clearance, which means your clearance, which is suspended. My clearance was suspended by Malcolm using administrative access that was obtained fraudulently, she said, which means the suspension itself is fraudulent, which means, Vivienne, he said it with enough directness that she stopped. Legally, you're correct. Practically, the door doesn't know that. It reads the credential. She looked at Malcolm. Restore my access. Malcolm looked at the table. Malcolm. Her voice was different now. Not louder. Just different in the way of something that has run out of patience with being managed. The text phone just told you that the person you've been working with is cutting his losses and leaving you in this room alone. So I'm going to give you one opportunity to make a decision that is in your own interest for possibly the first time today. She paused. Restore my building access now. Something moved through Malcolm Sayer's face. It was the thing that had been behind the measured warmth all morning, the controlled, calculated front of a man who had spent 11 years in a building where his reputation was his infrastructure. And what moved through it wasn't remorse, because Malcolm Sayer was not built for remorse in any obvious way. It was the thing that comes just before a person stops fighting a current they've realized they can't swim against. Picked up his phone. He opened the building management application. He typed for about 15 seconds. Vivienne's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it, looked at Declan. Access restored. Picked up his toolbox, looked at the board. Don't let anyone leave this room until the federal contact arrives, he said. And it wasn't quite a request, and it wasn't quite an order. It was the particular phrasing of someone who has spent time giving instructions in rooms where clarity matters more than deference. Then he looked at Renata Voss and nodded once, which she returned. Then he left the boardroom, and Vivienne was 2 steps behind him. The elevator, this time her credential working cleanly, the indicator light accepting her badge with the small click of a system returning to its intended configuration. They rode down in silence. The elevator was fast, as executive elevators generally are, and the silence had a different quality than the silences they'd shared in the maintenance shaft, or the server hub less pressurized, more complicated. How long will it take? Vivienne said. To isolate the network? 10 minutes if I can reach the junction without complications. And after that, the federal contact will need several hours, probably. They'll want to image the system before anyone can tamper with it. Vane running means they'll have other priorities running simultaneously, tracking where he went, securing his assets, whatever else he's been building with that technology. He paused. It's going to be a long afternoon. She looked at the elevator doors. You have a parent-teacher conference at 4. I know. It's 2:17, I know. She was quiet for a moment. I'll have someone drive you, after the network is secured. Whatever time that is, I'll have someone drive you directly. He didn't say that it was fine or that she didn't need to. He said, thank you. It came out simply, without the self-conscious weight of a person unaccustomed to accepting help. Just 2 words. meaning exactly what they said. The elevator reached basement level 1. The server room was exactly where the building documentation said it was, and the network junction was exactly where a network junction of its type would logically be. And Declan had the building management system physically isolated from its external connection in 9 minutes and 40 seconds not clean, involving a workaround on a fiber connection that resisted the standard disconnection sequence, but complete and verifiable. When he finished, he straightened up from the junction panel and found Vivienne leaning against the server room wall, watching him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the evaluating look, not the contained fury, not the forced composure of a person managing a crisis. Something quieter than all of those. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Then I was thinking about what you said. In the maintenance shaft. About Ruby and the dinosaurs." He closed the junction panel. "Pachycephalosaurus," he said. "She's right, you know. It doesn't get enough respect." He looked at her. She was looking back at him with the slight tilt of someone who has said something they meant to be lighter than it landed and is now waiting to see how it lands. "I'll tell her that," he said. "She'll want your reasoning." "I have reasoning. I don't doubt it." Above them, the building was settling into a different kind of noise, not the controlled crisis noise of the morning, but the complicated, human noise of several hundred people processing an event that was going to take them a long time to fully understand. Phones going to voicemail and then getting called back. Questions being asked of people who didn't have answers yet. Particular murmur of an institution discovering the distance between what it thought it was and what it had been. Declan picked up his toolbox. The weight of it was familiar in the way of something that has been carried long enough to stop feeling heavy. "The control panel in the basement," he said. Vivienne looked at him. "The HVAC secondary circuit," he said. "That's why I came here this morning." Still broken. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed up, a real one. Short and slightly disbelieving, the laugh of a person who has held so much together for so long that when something genuinely catches them off guard, the release of it is immediate and uncontrolled. "Declan," she said. "Yeah, go to the parent-teacher conference." He nodded. He was almost to the server room door when she spoke again. "The control panel will still be broken tomorrow," she said. "If you wanted to come back." He paused with his hand on the door. He didn't say yes. He also didn't say no. He said, "I'll put it in the schedule," which was not a deflection, and both of them understood it wasn't. Then he went through the door, and up through the building, and out through the lobby, the same lobby where, 5 hours ago, he'd set down a toolbox and walked toward a woman being shoved backward by a man who thought numbers on a badge conferred the right to decide who deserved protecting. The rain had stopped. He found his truck in the service bay. He put the toolbox in the back. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment with the engine off, the way he'd sat that morning, and then he checked the time, calculated the route to Ruby's school, and started the engine. In the boardroom 7 floors above the lobby, Malcolm Sayer was not speaking. He was sitting with the particular stillness of a man who has finished calculating and found that the numbers don't add up in any direction that helps him, and is now simply waiting for what comes next. And in the lobby itself, where the morning had started, a facilities manager named Cho was on the phone with the building's HVAC vendor, explaining that the contractor who'd come to fix the secondary control panel had been unexpectedly delayed, and asking whether anyone could cover the work order before the end of business. The vendor said they'd send someone. They did not say they'd send anyone like Declan Shaw. They wouldn't have known who to send even if they'd wanted to. The parent-teacher conference was at 4 o'clock, and Declan was 7 minutes late. He'd called ahead from the truck Ruby's teacher, a woman named Ms. Aldridge, who had the patient, unflappable quality of someone who had been doing this long enough to have seen every version of the harried single parent, understood immediately and told him she'd wait. She did wait. She was sitting at the small table in the corner of the second-grade classroom when he came through the door, still wearing the faded gray work shirt with the grease from the maintenance shaft still faintly visible on the sleeve. Contractor lanyard stuffed in his jacket pocket, toolbox left in the truck, because there was no version of walking into an elementary school with a toolbox that didn't require explanation. Ruby was in after-school care down the hall. He could hear distantly, The particular noise of a room containing 22nd graders who had consumed lunch approximately 6 hours ago and were running on the specific volatile energy of children who have been sitting still, longer than their bodies were designed to accommodate. Miss Aldridge looked at him when he sat down. She was in her 50s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the direct, unpatronizing manner of a person who deals with children all day and has consequently lost all patience for the adult versions of the same evasions. "Rough day?" she said. "Unusual," he said. "Ruby mentioned you were going to a big building this morning." "She did?" "She told the class her dad fixes buildings." Pause. "She also told them that Pachycephalosaurus is the most underrated dinosaur, and that anyone who disagrees hasn't done the research." Aldridge's expression remained professionally neutral. "She's very specific." "I know," he said. The conference took 22 minutes. Ms. Aldridge told him that Ruby was reading 2 grade levels above her cohort, that her math was strong, but her patience with the mechanics of showing her work was not, that she had a tendency to tell other students when their dinosaur facts were wrong, in a way that was accurate but occasionally required redirection, that she was kind, in the particular way of children who are kind without performing it. She'd spent 3 recesses this month, sitting with a boy who didn't have anyone to sit with, not because anyone asked her to, but because she'd noticed and decided. Declan listened to all of it. He asked 2 questions, thanked Miss Aldridge in a way that she could tell meant something. Then he went down the hall and collected his daughter. Ruby came through the after-school room door, like she always did at approximately 80% of her maximum velocity, backpack bouncing, with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific person and is relieved to see them, which she converted immediately into the practiced 8-year-old coolness of a child who does not want to appear too relieved. "You're late," she said. 7 minutes. Ms. Aldridge waited. "I know." I thanked her. Ruby studied him with the evaluating eye she'd developed sometime around age 6 and had been refining ever since an eye that Declan recognized, with a complicated feeling he'd never tried to name, as her mother's. "You have something on your shirt. Maintenance shaft." "What's a maintenance shaft?" "A ladder inside a wall." She considered this. "Why were you on a ladder inside a wall?" "It's a long story. I like long stories." "I know you do." He held out his hand, and she took it in the way she still did when she wasn't thinking about it, which was the thing he was most careful not to draw attention to, because he knew that at some point she'd become aware of it and stop. "Let's get dinner, and I'll tell you the parts that aren't boring." "Are there parts that aren't boring?" "Several." She seemed satisfied with this. They walked out through the school's front entrance into the early evening air cooler now, then the morning, the rain having wrung something out of the day and left behind a cleaner version of it. Parking lot was mostly empty, the after-school traffic having peaked and subsided, and Declan's truck sat where he'd left it with the toolbox still visible through the rear window. Ruby looked at the truck, then up at him. "Did you fix the building?" He thought about the server room, the maintenance shaft, the boardroom with the log data cycling on the screen. 7 minutes he'd been late. "Mostly," he said. She accepted this with the equanimity of a child who has learned that her father's answers are accurate even when they're incomplete. They got in the truck. He started the engine. Ruby opened her backpack and produced a drawing she'd done in art class, a Pachycephalosaurus in green crayon, rendered with the confident anatomical specificity of a child who has studied the subject. "For the refrigerator," she said, handing it to him. He looked at it. The dinosaur had a slightly lopsided head and a very determined expression. "It's good," he said. "I know," she said, with the serene self-assessment of someone who has not yet learned to be uncertain about what she's good at. Put the truck in reverse and drove them home. The investigation into Malcolm Sayer and Leonard Vane did not resolve quickly or cleanly, because investigations of that scope never do. The federal contacted a woman named Diane Marsh, who answered the number on the worn business card with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been waiting for a reason to make certain calls for longer than she wanted to admit, arrived at North Stars headquarters with a team of 4 at 6:40 that evening. She was in her mid-50s, with the specific kind of tiredness that comes not from working too much, but from knowing too much for too long, and she walked through the building with the orientation of someone who has been briefed thoroughly on the way in. She had, in fact, been briefed by Declan Shaw by phone from the parking lot of Ruby's school at 4:12 p.m., while Ruby ate a granola bar in the passenger seat and drew a second dinosaur on the back of a permission slip. Conversation was professional and fairly short, because most of what Diane Marsh needed to know she already knew, and the parts she didn't know she was good at understanding quickly. Vane, she said when he got to that part. Yes. I'd hoped the name wouldn't come up again. So had I... Pause. How intact is the system documentation? I physically isolated the building management system from external connection at approximately 2:40 this afternoon. The isolation should have prevented a remote wipe. If Vane tried one after that point, it didn't reach the system. Good. Another pause. How are you, Declan? It was a personal question, and she asked it the way people ask personal questions when they're genuinely asking, but also understand that the answer may be brief. He thought about the maintenance shaft, about the boardroom, about the specific expression on Vivienne Rowe's face when she told him the broken control panel would still be there tomorrow. Fine, he said. I'm good. You were working as a building technician. I am a building technician. Of course you are, she said, in the tone of someone who is not arguing the point. Your name is going to appear in the documentation, Declan. There's no way around that. I know. It'll serve as some of your background. I know that too. A longer pause. Does that bother you? He looked at Ruby through the passenger window. She'd finished the permission slip dinosaur and moved on to drawing something on her hand with the pen she wasn't supposed to have in her backpack. Less than it used to, he said. Diane Marsh arrived. Her team secured the building system documentation before Vane's remote wipe protocol, which he had, in fact, attempted at 6:17 p.m. from a location that was subsequently traced to an airport lounge in Charlotte, could reach the isolated server. The data was intact. All of it, including the 53 days of access logs, the override command history, the communication records that showed Malcolm Sayer's coordination with Vane's operation across 18 months of defense contract fraud. Leonard Vane was detained at 6:53 p.m. at the gate of a flight to Zurich by federal agents who had been tracking his location since Renata Voss made her call from the boardroom at 2:31. He did not resist. He sat down in the plastic airport chair when asked to sit and looked at the floor with the expression of a man who has spent years being the person who constructed situations and has arrived at a moment in which the situation is being constructed entirely without his input. Malcolm Sayer did not attempt to run. He sat in the North Star boardroom for 4 hours after Declan left through Renata Voss's calls, through the arrival of the company's legal counsel, through the point at which the 3 aligned board members quietly stopped being aligned and began the careful, self-interested process of cooperating with investigators. He sat with the particular stillness of a man who has understood that motion is no longer useful, and when Diane Marsh's team arrived and asked him to accompany them, he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and went. 11 years of reputation. It did not protect him. It delayed the recognition of what he was, which is a different thing, and the difference matters when you're the person who was deceived by it. Patricia Hayne had known something was wrong for 3 weeks and stayed quiet because Malcolm Sayer was Malcolm Sayer. Owen Cho had spent 3 weeks trying to route a concern through a system that Malcolm had spent 7 weeks making sure would route it nowhere useful. 400 people had watched a woman get shoved across a lobby and stood still. Not because they were cowardly, but because the man who ordered it had spent 11 years making himself into the kind of authority that people have been taught not to question. Reputation wielded correctly is a form of control. Most people never recognize it as such because they're too busy respecting it. Vivienne Rowe understood this in a way she hadn't fully understood it that morning, and the understanding sat in her uncomfortably for weeks afterward, not because it was new information exactly, but because there is a difference between knowing something in the abstract and knowing it because you watched it operate in your own building, on your own people, partly through your own counter-signature on 43 fraudulent authorization documents. She had signed those documents. That was a fact that did not go away because the fraud was Malcolm's. She had been deceived, which the investigators confirmed and the board ultimately accepted. But being deceived is not the same as being uninvolved. And she spent a significant amount of time in the weeks that followed sitting with the discomfort of that distinction, instead of resolving it prematurely into a cleaner story about villainy and innocence. She did not go back to running North Star the way she had run it before. She went back running it differently with the specific knowledge of a person who has learned where the blind spots were, not by being told about them, but by standing inside one and watching it operate. She restructured the internal reporting system so that concerns about financial irregularities had 3 separate pathways to executive leadership, none of which passed through the COO. She commissioned an independent ethics review, the same review Malcolm had quietly delayed until it died 2 years earlier, and this time it happened. She met individually with every employee who had raised concerns that had been buried, and she did not offer them speeches about how things would be different. She offered them specific structural changes and then made those changes. Because the difference between leadership that has learned something and leadership that performs having learned something is always visible eventually, and she no longer had any interest in the performance. Patricia Hain was promoted to Director of Contract Compliance, a position that had not existed at North Star before Vivienne created it. Owen Cho was offered a senior role in the finance division. He asked for 2 weeks to think about it and then said yes. The employees who had been quietly denied access to Vivienne's office, the ones Derek Morrow had been keeping from her in the weeks before the takeover attempt, the ones whose concerns might have unraveled the plan earlier, were not punished for having been excluded, which should have been obvious, but apparently needed to be stated. Because in large organizations, the people who get caught in the crossfire of a conspiracy often absorb consequences that belong to those conspirators simply by proximity. Derek Morrow was terminated. He did not face criminal charges because his role had been facilitation rather than origination. He had known that Malcolm was running an operation and had chosen participation over the alternative, which is a moral failure with a specific weight to it that a termination letter doesn't quite capture, but it was what the evidence supported. He left the building on the afternoon of the incident with the expression of a man who is trying to figure out what the next version of his life looks like, which is a harder problem than it appears to be when the identity you've built is contingent on a title. Declan's name appeared in the investigation documentation, as Diane Marsh had said it would. The relevant portions of his service record, the Navy SEAL background, the reconnaissance and extraction specialization, the final deployment, and the program he'd helped develop protocols for became part of the federal filing, which became part of a public record that several journalists found and several more subsequently wrote about. The coverage was not extensive. It ran for about 2 weeks in the business and technology press, with one piece in a national outlet that framed the story around the building technician who turned out not to be, and which was accurate in its facts and somewhat lazy in its framing. The way most media coverage is when the actual story is more complicated than the available headline. Ruby's class read about it on the internet because one of the other second graders had an older sibling who found it and told everyone, and Ruby came home from school on the Thursday. It ran knowing that people were writing about her dad. She was thoughtful about it in the way she was thoughtful about things that mattered to her carefully, without performing the thoughtfulness. They said, "You used to be a Navy SEAL," she said at dinner.
Yes.
She ate her pasta for a moment. "How come you never told me?" He considered how to answer this. There were several versions of the true answer, and he chose the one that was most accurate without being more than an 8-year-old needed to carry. "Because that part of my life was before you," he said. "And when you came along, you were what mattered, not the other stuff." She thought about this. "But you still knew how to do it today." "The building stuff." "Yes. So it didn't go away." "No," he said, "it didn't go away." Another pause. "Are you going to go back to doing that? The other stuff?" He looked at her across the dinner table. The Pachycephalosaurus drawing was on the refrigerator behind her, slightly crooked because he'd put it up in a hurry and hadn't straightened it. And she'd noticed but hadn't mentioned it because she'd decided the important thing was that it was there. "No," he said, "my schedule's full." She looked at him with the evaluating eye, deciding whether he meant it. She decided he did. "Okay," she said, and went back to her pasta. He went back to work the next morning. He went back to North Star. The HVAC secondary control panel in the basement was, as Vivienne had noted, still broken. Fixed it in an hour and 40 minutes. which was faster than he'd originally estimated because the relay issue turned out to be straightforward once he actually got to look at it, without the surrounding situation being what it had been the previous day. He replaced the faulty component, ran the diagnostic, confirmed the system was reading correctly, and wrote up the completion report on his tablet. Vivienne came down to the basement while he was packing up. She was in a different blazer than the day before charcoal again, because apparently that was simply her color, and she looked like she had slept a limited but functional number of hours, which he suspected was more than she'd expected to sleep given the circumstances. "Panel," she said, looking at the closed access door. "Fixed. That's why you came yesterday. That's why I came yesterday." She leaned against the wall of the basement corridor with the slightly unguarded posture of someone who has been performing competence for 20 consecutive hours and is now in the presence of one. Person in front of whom the performance is not required. "Diane Marsh called me this morning. What did she say?" "The building system documentation is intact and that the federal case is solid." A pause. "She also said that you were one of the most technically capable operators she'd worked with in 12 years, and that she'd spent the past 6 years occasionally wondering what you were doing." She said that, she said, and I'm quoting, "He's fixing things," which is what he was always good at, so it makes sense. Vivienne looked at him with the slight tilt that had appeared on her face in the server room the day before. "I thought that was a nice thing to say about a person." He closed his toolbox. "I have a job this afternoon. Office building on Clement Street. Ventilation system."
I know.
She said it in the tone of someone who has looked something up. "I called your company this morning. Spoke to your dispatcher. I wanted to know your schedule." He looked at her. "Why? Because I have a proposition." She straightened slightly. "Not the security division. I know you declined that. This is different." She paused, choosing her words in the way of a person who has thought about how to say this and is still not entirely sure they've gotten it right. North Star works with a lot of buildings, facilities, infrastructure, systems management. I want to create a consulting position, not a title, not an office, not anything that requires you to wear a different shirt. A flexible arrangement. You work your regular jobs. You set your own schedule. And when we have a systems issue that requires someone with a specific combination of skills, we call you. She met his gaze. Ruby's school pickups don't change. Nothing changes. It's just an option to call. He was quiet for a moment. "It's not about yesterday," she said. I'm not trying to do something for you because you helped me. That's not what this is. What is it?" She seemed to think about how honest to be, which he'd noticed was a calculation she made quickly and generally resolved in favor of honesty. "It's the recognition that I have been running a company that relied too heavily on people's titles and not nearly enough on what they actually know how to do," she said. "And that the most useful person in my building yesterday was someone my security director laughed at." She paused. "I'm trying to be a different kind of CEO than I was on Tuesday. Part of that." He picked up his toolbox. "It's the pay structure." Something in her expression relaxed, a small thing, barely visible, the relief of a person who has made a real offer and is watching it be considered seriously rather than deflected. "Hourly, above your current rate. Negotiated per project. Full discretion to decline anything that conflicts with your regular work or your schedule. I'd want it in writing, of course. And Ruby's pickups aren't negotiable." "I know they're not." He nodded. It was the same nod he'd given Renata Voss in the boardroom, the compact acknowledgement of a man who does not use more motion than a situation requires. "Send the paperwork to my business email." "I have it," she said. "I told you I spoke to your dispatcher." He almost smiled. "Of course you do." She walked with him to the service elevator. They rode up in the same elevator he'd ridden down to the basement, the service elevator. Not the executive one, because the service elevator went directly to the lobby and the lobby was where he'd parked. It was a small detail, and it was not lost on either of them. The lobby was different than it had been the morning before. Not visually, the marble floors were the same, the glass ceiling the same, the North Star logo in the same position above the reception desk. But the quality of it was different in the way that spaces are different after significant events. Not because the space has changed, but because the people moving through it carry the memory of what happened there, and it changes the texture of how they inhabit it. The security personnel at the desk were different people than the morning before new staff. Temporary until the full security review Vivienne had commissioned was complete, wearing current credentials and operating on the correct frequencies. They looked up when Vivienne and Declan came through, and their expressions were the expressions of people who know they are looking at the two people central to the previous day's events, and are attempting to calibrate an appropriate response. Several employees crossing the lobby saw Vivienne and stopped to speak to her, not the formal, managed interactions of people navigating corporate hierarchy, but the slightly awkward, genuine exchanges of people who were relieved to see someone and weren't entirely sure how to say so. She handled each one with the directness that Declan had come to understand was simply how she was built, no performance, no managed warmth, just attention, which is rarer and more valuable than most forms of warmth. At the main entrance, she stopped. He stopped beside her. "The article about you," she said, "the one that ran yesterday. I saw it. Ruby? She asked me about it at dinner." Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the glass doors, the financial district moved in its usual morning pattern, the particular organized density of a city going about its work, indifferent to the specific dramas occurring in any individual building. "What did you tell her?" she said. That the seal part was before her. She was what mattered now. She looked at him for a moment with the expression that she'd had in the server room, the one that was quieter than her other expressions. "That's a good thing to tell a child," she said. "It's the true thing," he said. There was a particular kind of person. Declan had come to understand across 37 years encountering people in circumstances that stripped away the curated versions of themselves, who became more themselves under pressure rather than less. Most people became more frightened, more defended, more reduced. Some people became cleaner, not simpler, but cleaner, the way a piece of metal becomes cleaner when you apply enough heat to burn off what was incidental. Vivienne Rowe was that second kind. He'd seen it in the lobby when she'd told Derek Morrow that whatever mistakes she made were hers to make. He'd seen it in the boardroom when she'd presented for 40 minutes from memory and corrected her own errors without comment. He'd seen it in the basement when she'd made an offer that was genuinely generous and then told him it wasn't about gratitude, which was the kind of thing people say when they mean it, and the kind of thing people say when they don't, and the difference is visible if you know how to look. He knew how to look. "The panel on Clement Street," he said. "I need to leave by 8:15. It's 8:07, she said. She'd checked her phone without him noticing, which meant she'd been tracking it. "I know, then you should go." He should go. He had a ventilation system waiting, and a building that needed fixing, and Ruby was at school on the other side of the city, drawing things on the backs of permission, slips with a pen she wasn't supposed to have, and the day had the specific quality of ordinary days when you're paying attention to them, the quality of something that is exactly what it is and is enough. He walked toward the lobby doors. He was almost through them when she spoke. "Declan." He turned. She was standing in the center of the lobby, in the approximate spot where everything had started the previous morning, not deliberately, he thought, just where the trajectory of walking and stopping had placed her. The marble floor around her was empty. The security desk was behind her. The morning light came through the glass ceiling and did what light does, which is illuminate without comment. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the panel. For the other part." He considered several responses. He chose the accurate one. "You did most of it," he said. "I just knew which wires to pull." She looked at him for a moment. "You keep saying that. Keeps being true." She smiled. It was a real one, not the slight tilt of earlier, not the dark amusement she'd shown in the maintenance corridor, but a full one briefly, the kind that changes the whole face and then passes before you can quite hold on to the shape of it. He went through the doors. He got in his truck. He put it in drive. He pulled out of the service bay and into the street and joined the ordinary movement of the city, which continued around him with the complete indifference of a city that does not adjust its pace for any individual person's circumstances. On the passenger seat, Ruby had left a drawing from the previous evening, a second Pachycephalosaurus, this one in blue crayon, with what appeared to be an expression of mild irritation at being underappreciated. She'd left it there deliberately, which he knew because she'd put it on the seat rather than in her backpack, and then gotten out of the truck without mentioning it. He picked it up at a red light and looked at it. The dinosaur had the same lopsided confidence as the first one. Something about it, the particular combination of anatomical commitment and crayon imprecision, was so specifically Ruby that it did what her drawings occasionally did, which was make the space behind his sternum feel briefly and unexpectedly full. He put it back on the seat carefully, facing up. Here is what he'd learned. Across 12 years of a career that operated in extremis, and another 6 years of a life that operated in the quiet, the thing he'd had to earn the understanding of rather than simply being told it. Because some things don't transfer through instruction. The most dangerous assumption a person can make is that they know what someone is capable of based on what they look like, what they're wearing, or what role they're currently filling. The lobby full of people who watched Vivienne get shoved had made that assumption about the man in the faded gray shirt. Derek Morrow had made it, more confidently, and with more immediate consequences. Malcolm Sayer had made it about Patricia Hain and Owen Cho, and every other employee he'd been certain would stay quiet, because people like that always stayed quiet. They're wrong, the Malcolms of the world. Not always in time to matter, but wrong in the way of something that is wrong at the foundation, wrong the way a structural calculation is wrong when it doesn't account for a load that was always there. And the corollary, the thing that takes longer to learn, because it runs against the particular vanity of people who are capable of things others aren't, being capable of something does not mean you are obligated to deploy it. Declan Shaw had spent 6 years choosing not to be what he had been, and the choice had not diminished the capability, it had simply reoriented it. Pointed it at the refrigerator with the Pachycephalosaurus drawings, and the school pickup at 3:15, and the cold kolfa and the ordinary machinery of a life built deliberately around one small specific person who needed him to be there. He had not lost anything by choosing that. He had, in fact, been in the right place at the right time, in the right building, with exactly the right knowledge, because a contractor who did not read facilities agreements would not have known about the maintenance ladder. And a man who had not chosen the quiet life would not have been the man fixing the panel in the first place. It doesn't always work out that way. He knew that. He was not building a philosophy from one good day. He was just noting, with the specific clarity that comes after a very long 24 hours, that the choice he'd made 6 years ago in a hospital in Virginia, holding a 7-month-old girl who had no idea what she'd already lost, had not been a sacrifice. It had been the most tactically sound decision of his career. The light changed. He drove. 3 months later, Declan arrived at North Star's headquarters on a Tuesday afternoon, with Ruby's backpack over one shoulder because he'd come from the school pickup directly, which Vivienne had told him was not a problem and had meant it. Ruby had been to the building once before the previous month, when a scheduling collision had produced the same situation. She'd walked through the lobby with the specific assessment of an 8-year-old evaluating a new environment, asked 2 questions about the ceiling height, and declared the building pretty good but not as good as the Natural History Museum, which Declan thought was a fair ranking. Today she came through the main entrance with her backpack half open, because she'd been looking for something in it in the car, and hadn't closed it properly. And she stopped in the center of the lobby and looked up at the glass ceiling, the same way she had the first time. Vivienne was crossing the lobby from the elevator bank when they arrived. She saw them and changed direction, not hurrying, just adjusting, the way a person adjusts when they see something that alters their trajectory without requiring urgency. "Ruby," she said. Ruby looked at her with the evaluating eye. "You're the CEO," she said. "I am. My dad helped you." Vivienne glanced at Declan, and the glance carried the particular weight of 2 people sharing a reference that doesn't require explanation. "He did," she said. "Ruby considered this. He says you did most of it." "He keeps saying that. He says that about things he actually did himself," Ruby said, with the flat certainty of a person who has been paying attention for 8 years. "He just doesn't like it when people make a big deal." Vivienne looked at Ruby for a moment, and something in her expression did what it did, shifted into that quieter register, the one that was more unguarded than her default. "That's a very accurate observation," she said. "I know," Ruby said. Around them, the lobby moved in its ordinary pattern. Security desk staffed by people in current credentials. The elevator bank, operational and unlocked. The main entrance doors, standing open to the afternoon air the way entrance doors are supposed to stand. Employees crossing the marble floor in the ordinary traffic of a building going about its business. With the particular quality of a place that has come through something and knows it and has decided to keep going. Several of the guards near the desk had noticed Declan and nodded the specific nod of people who know something about a person that the person did not advertise and have decided that the appropriate response is acknowledgement without performance. Declan noticed and didn't respond to it beyond the minimal return nod of a man who is not going to make anything of it. Ruby had moved away from them by 2 steps, looking at the lobby ceiling with the focus of a person conducting a structural assessment. The ceiling is glass, she said. All of it. Most of it, Vivienne said. What holds it up? Steel trusses, mostly. The engineering as she paused. Actually, your dad would know more about that than I would. Ruby turned and looked at Declan with an expression that meant she had just filed this away as a topic for a later, longer conversation, and that later was probably going to be dinner. He looked at the ceiling. Trusses and tension cables, he said. The glass panels are load-bearing in compression. It's actually a fairly elegant system. Elegant, Ruby repeated, trying out the word. Like a dinosaur skeleton? He thought about it. Something like that. She seemed satisfied. She came back to stand beside him close enough that her shoulder was against his arm, which was her version of the hand-holding she'd become intermittently self-conscious about, and looked at the lobby around them, with the easy authority of a child who has decided that a place is acceptable. Vivienne was watching them both, with the expression that had no performance in it, and Declan, who had learned to read her expressions across 3 months of Tuesdays and occasional phone calls about North Star's syphilis and one dinner that had started as a professional meeting and ended 3 hours later with Ruby asleep on. Vivienne's couch and both adults, talking quietly at the kitchen table about things that had nothing to do with buildings, was not pretending not to notice the expression. He met her eyes. She looked back at him. In the center of the lobby, where everything had started to shove, the silence, the 400 people, and the one who moved something that had no formal name and didn't require one existed between 2 adults who had both learned, by different and difficult routes, that trust is not a thing you extend to titles or to carefully constructed reputations or to the people who stand closest to power. Trust is something you extend to the person who reads the facilities agreement, who climbs the maintenance shaft, who tells you the true answer when the convenient one is available, who goes home to a 2nd-grade parent-teacher conference at 4 o'clock and is 7 minutes late and means it when he says the other stuff comes second. The lobby continued around them. The city continued outside the glass doors. The afternoon moved through its ordinary business. Ruby tugged on Declan's sleeve. Can we get food? I'm actually dying. You're not dying, he said. I'm very hungry, which is almost the same. Vivienne looked at Ruby with the expression she'd developed specifically for Ruby, which was the expression of a person encountering something they hadn't expected to find themselves fond of, and have found themselves fond of anyway, which is how fondness usually works. There's a place 2 blocks from here, she said. They have good pasta. Ruby's evaluating eye turned to Vivienne. What kind? Kind with the thick noodles. Pappardelle? Vivienne blinked. Yes, actually. Ruby looked at her father. She knows pasta. She knows a lot of things, he said. Then she should come, Ruby said, with the serene finality of an 8-year-old who has made a decision and sees no reason to complicate it. Declan looked at Vivienne. She looked back at him. I have a 4:30, she said. It's 3:51, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached back and pulled the 4:30 from whatever mental architecture she stored it in, assessed it, and made the kind of decision that a person makes when they've started understanding what actually matters. It can wait until 5, she said. They went through the lobby doors and into the afternoon together, a former Navy SEAL who fixed buildings, a CEO who had rebuilt one from the inside out, and an 8-year-old with strong opinions about dinosaurs and pasta, walking into the ordinary light of an ordinary Tuesday. Behind them, the North Star lobby continued its business. The glass ceiling held,